So the way the actual roof is bolted into the car, in the factory they put this base plate in here and it's bolted in at exactly the right position. There are a number of attachment points. There's one back here, one there, and one at the front up here. Don't touch those. These ones on the bottom here, they actually have a circular surround around them, which is the thing that tells you that's the base plate. And then this bit here is actually bolted to that base plate, and that's what actually puts it into the right position. There are pins on the base plate, which is what actually slot up into this, and then there are screws that go on top of it. There's also a single screw at the front here, which is the thing that actually puts it in the correct position here. So when you actually put this in, they're going to lower it down, it'll go over to the pins that are onto the base plate, and then what you want to do is put the screw under here and pull this forward so it's in the right position, and then you're going to bolt the bits down to the base plate. When you are removing these screws that detach the roof construction from the base plate, there are 3 along the bottom. The 2 forward ones you're going to get access to with the roof all the way down. The one at the back, the only way you can get access to that is by having the roof forward and lift up the tension bow to get access from the back. But the others you actually want to remove. They're actually they're really easily accessible with the roof all the way down. To remove the convertible compartment, the first thing you want to do is just remove the sensor or the antenna. There's a connection here. You've got to get your finger in up the back here, which is a bit of a pain, but it can be done. You just push it in and then that will just pop straight off like that. The connection's underneath there. Or it's just a single torque screw in the middle here. You can actually just unscrew that. That'll just remove, and then you can easily disconnect that. The 2 connection points on either side, you can actually remove both the nuts on both sides, and the thing will just sit here, it's nice and balanced. But the way this is designed is you can actually remove the one at the top, and the bottom one there's actually a big gap in there, so you can just loosen that on both sides and then just lift it up and off. I would suggest whilst you're doing that, have a big cover at the back here, covering the boot lid so you don't get, just in case it falls down, it doesn't damage it. And then this is going to be sticking up the whole time. When you're doing this, make sure, probably the easiest way to do it is to actually have the ignition turned on, motor it into this position, and then just leave the ignition on, because then the hydraulics are holding it up. And then once you remove the cover, then you can just turn the ignition off. I found with this cord here, you can actually just poke it down in there, and that just keeps it out of the way the whole time. You can pull that out later on. In addition to that, with these things flopping up and down, it'll actually get in the way of the roof as you're trying to move it in and out. So I found that just getting a rag or something and just jamming it down in here in that gap was a way of keeping it clear of the roof and keeping these things up, so you actually could maneuver the roof and do what you wanted with it. For the connection points over here, there's just these lift tabs on that. That's going to be sitting down there like that. You can open that up, and they're the hydraulic lines that run down to the pump. There are a number of clips along here that just push straight in, so you can just pull those out and just remove as required. And this one here, I won't do it at the moment because the hydraulics are on, but if you actually pull that, I'll just move that there like that, pull it that way, and then these things will pull apart, and then they just push straight back together again. I would suggest that when you are doing this, that you obviously have the ignition turned off, but also just move by hand the tonneau cover back and forth, as well as the roof up and down manually, to just drive as much fluid out of it as you possibly can, so there's no pressure in the system, and then disconnect it from there, and then have rags underneath it sitting there like that as you're disconnecting, so no fluid will actually drop down on it. And then I found with the tonneau cover removed, you can actually just get these ones that are on this back line here, and you can just shove them through the hole there, and they just sit there the whole time. Just cover that in a rag, and they're just out of the way, which is really nice. And obviously these sides here, that's connected to the valve block up the front. That's not going to, you're just going to take the roof out with that connected. With these connections, there are 2 of them, and you can't get them around the wrong way. They're just designed that one is male on this side, the other one's female on this side, so it's impossible to put them back together in the incorrect way, which is kind of nice. So when you first disconnect the hydraulic connections here down the side and unclip it, there's a bunch of clips along here, they just pull straight out. I would suggest removing the the hard top connection points on each side, because what that enables you to do, because at the moment there's everything sort of stuck in underneath here, and with that removed you can easily put your finger on the top of it, and then you can just sort of put over there and then just move it off to the side here. They swivel quite happily in the connection points there, and now that's just sitting there like that. Get all the electrical connections, drag them over the top, put them in here. If there are any electrical connections like this for the actual lock, then just put them out of the way. I've actually disconnected the seal and the connection points for everything down the side here, just to give me a little bit more room. You probably don't have to do that. But then with everything disconnected, those four, so the four nuts, so the 3 on the base plate as well as the one at the front there, then I found probably the easiest way to grab hold of it is actually underneath here. If you just want to lift it up, so you can actually put something underneath it, so you can actually prop it up, and then that'll just lift up quite happily. When you are lifting up, just be a little bit careful of the electrical harness and everything down the front here. There's a bit of room, but also there's a few places where it can get snagged. There's the big sort of connection point here for that base plate. There was sort of the screw sticks out a little bit in that direction, so when you lift it up, you're going to have to sort of lift up a bit and then move it aft to actually get everything out and clear of it. To hold everything up, so I've got access here so I don't have to remove the entire roof, I have unscrewed both sides completely, so the other side can lift. It'll actually just still sit on the pins on that base plate so it doesn't move out of the way. But then to hold this one up, I've just got a piece of timber, but the problem is that, like, this thing's pretty heavy and you want to be careful that this doesn't slip off while you're moving around it. So what I've done, I've made a piece of timber. The thing's 23 centimeters long, and that allows me to sort of get it high enough though so I can easily get my hands in underneath it, etc. You can see on the top here, this is where one of the pins would otherwise be when it's actually down on the base plate. I've actually just put a little, it's an 8mm screw that I've just chopped the head off. So that actually sits through that hole, so this cannot fall off. And at the bottom end on the actual pin that this would have sat on, I've actually drilled an 8mm hole so it sits down over the top of it, so this piece of timber cannot move, just to make sure it's nice and safe. Because to be honest, if your hand got trapped in underneath here with it falling, mate, you would do some serious damage. The thing's very heavy. To remove the valve block here, 2 screws, that just comes off, then that'll just be able to move to the side a little bit, even with the hydraulic connections still there, and that will allow you to get access to, on the other side here, the solenoid. So there are 3 of those. Each of the plugs is color coded black, blue and white to each of the individual solenoids, so you can't get those mixed up. There's a single, also there are 2 Allen screws for each of those, and then once you actually get this removed, you can actually get your fingers in there, wiggle out the electrical connector, and then you can pull out each of those solenoids if required. To cover all the hydraulic lines and the electrical harness down the bottom here, there's this cover. There are 4 screws that hold it on. There's a small one at the top which goes down and holds it against the arm, and then there's 3 that come into the side here. When it's actually down, it's actually a little bit difficult to get access to all of this. So you'll need to sort of have some smallish tools. I think it's a T20 in here to actually get this out. And then with that removed, you can see there are actually 2 sort of holes in the arm, where in the bottom one is where that electrical harness is going to go, and at the top there are where the 2 hydraulic lines are going to go. When you fit this, the problem with it, you can see there's that edge there, so as that rotates down, it was actually crimping in here, which is where the break was actually occurring. So the problem is, as you can see, is to actually try and get in here, do the fix, and then actually have the actual soldering joints. You actually want those as far down here as you possibly can, so you've got nice fresh wire in here. That's obviously a little bit difficult, which is why I've actually got in here, pulled everything up, so I can actually pull this up a lot further and actually get all the soldering joints down here, which is going to be much further down there. When you fit this, obviously there needs to be some slack in there so this can bend and doesn't actually put too much force on it as this rotates down. For the tonneau cover, This is the locking mechanism. There's obviously one of each on each side. There's an attachment screw there and there to remove on the underside, and I can't really show it, but there's actually the Bowden cable. It comes from the locking mechanism, which is underneath the rear seat, and that Bowden cable is actually, there's just a little clip on it that just a little E-clip that you remove, and with that removed you can disconnect the Bowden cable, and then you can actually remove this if required. There's a single wiring harness there that connects actually up the front, up here along the side, and the same on both sides. And you can see when I move that Bowden cable there, that whole thing is just going to lock that down, and that's obviously what's happening when that gets locked in place. In this position here is the hard top connection point. I don't have a hard top, but this is where that would be. There are a couple of things that are attached to it. The first thing, because this is the sensor that sits on it, I've actually taped over the top of the contacts here, because sometimes they can arc out easily when you're working on the car. But that thing there just clips straight on, so when that's sitting in the car you can actually just sort of get a screwdriver under each end and that just unclips straight off. There are two M6 screws in there. They've got red Loctite on them, so they're in there pretty tight, but they will come out. And also attached to it, that little small Allen screw there is a sensor, which is going to be sitting there like that. You can just loosen it off and pull that off. That connection point is up the front, and that's just going to make that a little bit easier, give you a little bit more room. And also, if you want to remove the lock here for the cover, there are two screws, there's Allen screws down the side here. Then just move the seal out of the way. You can lift that up, but it's a bit hard to get it clear. You can't see, but it's a pretty simple clip on the other side here for the Bowden cable that goes down to the lock and be underneath the rear seats. You can just remove that E-clip and then just pop that off, and then that whole thing can be removed out. Again, the connection point for that is just up the front there. This is the sensor here, the hall sensor that gives the convertible module the position of the actual roof. So as the main shaft moves, or the main jack moves, this arm in here moves, and it moves this thing along here, and the center is actually in this inside here. And to remove that, the actual electrical connector is inside there. You'd need to remove those two screws in there, remove this one here, so that actually becomes free, and then it looks like you could slide that forward and move that whole thing out to replace if required.